My name is Gabrielle, and I'm 32 years old. When I married into the wealthy Hamilton family, I never imagined my mother-in-law Victoria would ban me from their annual yacht trip. What hurt most was watching my husband Michael shrug and say, "Maybe next year." What Victoria didn't know was that her late husband had left the yacht to me in his will. I held back my tears until I arrived at the marina and heard the staff bow and say, "Welcome aboard, owner. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If you've ever dealt with difficult in-laws, hit that like and subscribe button." I promise the moment Victoria realized her power play had backfired was worth the 5 years of emotional warfare I endured. I met Michael Hamilton at a charity gala 5 years ago. I was there representing the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade, accepting a donation from the Hamilton Family Foundation. Michael was handling the public relations for his family's foundation, and from the moment our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, something clicked between us. Michael was handsome in that polished, privileged way. Perfect teeth, designer suit, and a confident smile that came from never having to worry about money. But what attracted me most was how he listened when I talked about my passion for teaching. Unlike other wealthy men I'd met who saw my career as a cute hobby, Michael asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely impressed by my dedication to my students. Our romance was whirlwind by anyone's standards. After 3 months of dating, Michael proposed during a surprise weekend trip to Paris. I said yes without hesitation, caught up in the romance, and deeply in love with the kind, attentive man who seemed to adore everything about me. The wedding was set for just 6 months later, a timeline that I would later learn Victoria Hamilton strongly objected to. "Darling, you barely know this girl," I overheard her telling Michael one day before the wedding. The Hamilton name carries certain responsibilities. Perhaps a longer engagement would be prudent. Michael had assured his mother that he was certain about me, but in retrospect, I should have noticed how he didn't quite meet her eyes when he said it. The first sign of his conflict avoidance where Victoria was concerned. My background couldn't have been more different from the Hamiltons. My father had been a high school history teacher, my mother a dedicated nurse at the county hospital. We had lived comfortably but modestly in a suburban neighborhood where Halloween meant homemade costumes and Christmas meant thoughtful gifts rather than extravagant ones. I had worked part-time jobs through college and graduated with student loans that I was still paying off when I met Michael. The Hamiltons, by contrast, had old money, the kind that was spoken about in hushed, respectful tones. Victoria's family had banking connections going back generations, while her late husband Harold had multiplied the family fortune through strategic investments in technology startups before they were trendy. Their home was a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and staff who had been with the family for decades. They didn't just have money, they had the kind of wealth that shaped their entire worldview. From the moment Victoria met me, she made it clear that she found me lacking. Her criticisms were always wrapped in a veneer of politeness that made them difficult to challenge. "Oh, Gabrielle, is that what teachers are wearing these days?" she would say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Or, "How brave of you to speak up about politics when you haven't had the opportunity to travel internationally much." In the early days, Michael would occasionally defend me with a gentle, "Mum, come on," but he never directly confronted her behavior. I told myself that Victoria would warm up to me once she got to know me better, that I could win her over with kindness and respect. I brought her thoughtful gifts, offered to help with family events, and always showed interest in the family history she was so proud of. But no matter what I did, Victoria remained cool and distant, treating me like a temporary inconvenience that would eventually go away. The annual Hamilton family yacht trip was a tradition stretching back decades. Every summer, the entire extended family would spend 2 weeks sailing along the coast, stopping at exclusive ports and private islands. It was, according to Michael, the highlight of the family calendar, a time for bonding, relaxation, and maintaining important family connections. My first experience with the yacht trip came a month after our wedding. I had been excited but nervous, wanting desperately to fit in with my new family. Victoria had assigned us the smallest cabin, far from the main gathering areas, explaining sweetly that newlyweds need their privacy. She had forgotten to include me in the meal planning, resulting in no accommodation for my shellfish allergy. When I offered to help with daily activities, she would smile tightly and say, "This is family time, dear. Why don't you just relax with a book?" By the end of that first trip, I had spent more time alone in my cabin than with my new family. Michael had been pulled into endless conversations about family investments and obligations, leaving me to navigate the complex social dynamics on my own. When I tried to discuss it afterward, Michael minimized my concerns. "Mom's just set in her ways," he explained. Next year will be better. She just needs time to adjust to having you in the family. But the next year was no better, nor was the year after that. Each summer, Victoria found new ways to exclude me from scheduling mother-son bonding during key activities, to seating me at the far end of the table during meals, away from Michael and the main conversations. And each time Michael would acknowledge my feelings, but ultimately do nothing to change the situation. By our 4th year of marriage, I had begun to dread the annual yacht announcement. I wasn't sure how much more exclusion I could tolerate, especially as I watched Michael consistently choose his mother's approval over standing up for his wife. The announcement about this year's yacht trip came during a formal family dinner at Victoria's estate. Michael and I had arrived a few minutes late due to traffic, and Victoria had made a show of having to rearrange the seating to accommodate us, though the table was clearly set for the exact number of guests present. "Now that everyone is finally here," Victoria said, once we were seated, tapping her glass delicately with a silver spoon. I wanted to share the exciting details for this summer's yacht excursion. The table immediately buzzed with enthusiasm. Victoria's brother and his wife began discussing which ports they hoped to visit, while Michael's cousins reminisced about funny moments from previous trips. I sat quietly, already feeling the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "I've planned something truly special this year," Victoria continued, her perfectly manicured hand resting lightly on the table. "We'll be sailing along the Amalfi Coast for the first week, then crossing to the Greek islands for the second. The itinerary includes several exclusive events that I've arranged with some dear friends in Monaco." She paused, her gaze sweeping the table, but noticeably skipping over me. "Unfortunately, space will be somewhat limited this year. We'll be hosting the Cunninghams for part of the journey. Very important connections for the family foundation, which means we'll need to be a bit more selective about our passenger list." My fork froze halfway to my mouth as I processed her words. Across the table, I saw Michael's cousin's wife throw me a sympathetic glance. "So family only this year," Victoria concluded with a thin smile. "I'm sure everyone understands the importance of these connections for our future endeavours." The table had gone quiet. Everyone knew exactly what Victoria was doing, but no one was willing to challenge her. Least of all Michael, who was suddenly very interested in cutting his steak into perfectly even pieces. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice level with effort, "when you say family only, you do realise that includes me, right, as Michael's wife?" Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Gabrielle, darling, of course you're family in the technical sense. But this trip involves some rather rough sailing, and I recall how seasick you got last time. I wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable. And the Cunninghams are particularly traditional about family structures. They respond best to blood relations when discussing business. I'm sure you understand." Before I could respond, Michael placed his hand on mine under the table, not in solidarity but in warning. "Maybe next year, honey," he said quietly. "The Cunningham connection is really important for the Foundation's new initiative." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I barely heard them over the roaring in my ears. I maintained my composure throughout the meal, smiling and nodding at appropriate intervals, but inside I was shaking with hurt and rage. Not just at Victoria's blatant exclusion, but at Michael's immediate capitulation. Once again, when forced to choose between standing up for me and keeping the peace with his mother, he had chosen the latter without hesitation. The drive home was tense and silent until we pulled into our driveway. "I can't believe you," I said as soon as the car was parked. "You just sat there and let your mother uninvite your wife from a family trip." Michael sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You're overreacting, Gabrielle. It's just one trip. The Cunninghams could bring millions in funding to the children's literacy program, the one you said was so important. This isn't about the Cunninghams. This is about your mother deliberately excluding me and you letting her do it. Again. Mom is set in her ways." Michael repeated his familiar refrain. "It's easier not to rock the boat." "Not for me," I countered, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "It's not easier for me to be constantly treated like an unwanted intruder in this family. Your mother has been undermining our marriage for 5 years, and you've never once truly stood up to her." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "That's not fair. I always try to smooth things over." "Smoothing things over isn't the same as standing up for what's right," I said. "I need you to tell your mother that either I come on the trip as your wife, or you don't go either." "I can't do that," Michael said, his voice dropping. "The family expects me there. The Foundation needs me there for the Cunningham negotiations." "And what about what I need?" I asked quietly. What about what our marriage needs? Michael reached for my hand, his expression softening. I'll talk to Mum. Okay, I'll see if there's a compromise. But I'd heard those words before, and I knew exactly how it would play out. Michael would have a brief, uncomfortable conversation with Victoria, she would stand firm, and he would eventually decide that it wasn't worth the conflict. He would go on the yacht trip without me promising to make it up to me afterward. As the days passed, exactly that scenario unfolded. Michael reported that Victoria was considering alternatives, but felt strongly about the family-only approach this year. Then he mentioned that perhaps I could join for just a few days at one of the ports. Finally, he admitted that Victoria wouldn't budge, but promised that he would limit his time on the trip to 1 week instead of 2. With each concession, the distance between us grew. I found myself questioning not just this specific situation, but the pattern our marriage had fallen into. Would I spend the rest of my life being subtly excluded, watching my husband choose his mother's approval over my feelings? Was this really the partnership I had signed up for? As these questions swirled in my mind, I began to formulate a plan, because there was something Victoria didn't know, something that would change everything about the power dynamic she had so carefully constructed. 6 months before the yacht trip drama began, my father-in-law, Harold Hamilton, had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. Months, not years. Victoria had immediately taken charge, arranging for the best specialists and setting up a hospital-quality room in their home. What surprised everyone, including me, was that Harold specifically requested that I be involved in his care. Gabrielle has a nurturing nature, he said when Victoria questioned this, and she doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass. So while Victoria managed the medical team and Michael handled the business affairs, I spent hours at Harold's bedside. I read to him from his favourite mystery novels. I helped the nurses with his daily care when Victoria needed to rest. I listened to his stories about his youth, his business triumphs and failures, and his hopes for the family's future. A genuine bond formed between us, one that clearly irritated Victoria, who would often find reasons to interrupt our conversations or send me on unnecessary errands. But Harold was insistent about my presence, and for once, his will overrode Victoria's. As his condition deteriorated, Harold began to have private conversations with me. At first, they were reflective, memories he wanted to share, advice he hoped I would pass on to Michael. But as time went on, he began to express regrets. Victoria wasn't always this way, he told me one afternoon when we were alone. The money changed her, made her afraid of losing status, losing control. She forgot what really matters. He took my hand in his frail one. I've watched how she treats you, Gabrielle. I've said nothing, and that's my greatest shame. A man should have the courage to correct his wife when she's wrong, just as she should correct him. I failed in that. I tried to deflect uncomfortable with criticism of Victoria from her dying husband, but Harold was determined to speak his mind. She won't change, he said bluntly, not unless something forces her to see the consequences of her behaviour. Michael is too much like me. Conflict-averse, eager to please. He won't stand up to her either. A few weeks before he died, Harold asked to meet privately with his lawyer. Victoria was furious at being excluded, but couldn't override Harold's direct request. The meeting lasted several hours, with various papers being brought in for Harold's signature. When Harold passed away a month later, the family gathered for the reading of the will. Most of it was unsurprising. The bulk of his personal fortune went to Victoria, with substantial trusts established for Michael and his cousins. The family foundation received a significant endowment, and there were generous bequests to the household staff. Then came the unexpected part. To my daughter-in-law, Gabrielle Hamilton, the lawyer read, I leave full and exclusive ownership of the family yacht, Hamilton's Legacy, along with an endowment for its maintenance and operation. Gabrielle showed me true compassion and kindness during my final days, expecting nothing in return. She has earned her place in this family, whether others recognize it or not. The room had gone completely silent. Victoria's face drained of colour, then flushed dark red. Michael looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The other family members exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unsure how to react. There must be some mistake, Victoria finally said, her voice tight. Harold would never leave a family heirloom to someone who isn't blood family. The lawyer who had worked with Harold for decades looked at her over his glasses. There is no mistake, Mrs. Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton was very clear about his wishes, and he was of sound mind when he made these decisions. He handed me a thick folder. Here are all the relevant documents, including the transfer of registration. "The yacht is legally yours, Mrs. Hamilton." Victoria contested the will, of course. She hired aggressive lawyers who tried to argue that Harold had been unduly influenced during his illness. But Harold had been thorough. There were videos of him explaining his decisions, medical evaluations, confirming his mental competence, and multiple witnesses to his intentions. After 3 months of legal battles, the courts upheld his wishes. The yacht was mine. I had never intended to flaunt this ownership. In fact, I had offered to consider the yacht as still belonging to the family, available for their traditional trips. Victoria had grudgingly accepted this arrangement while continuing to treat me as an outsider. She handled all the planning for the previous year's trip, and I had naively assumed we had reached a détente of sorts, until she explicitly uninvited me from this year's excursion. As the departure date approached, I made my own preparations. I contacted the yacht's captain, a long-time employee who had known Harold for years and who had always been kind to me. "Mrs. Hamilton, the yacht is registered in your name," he confirmed when I called him privately. "The crew takes their instructions from you regardless of what other family members might say." With the captain's support, I arranged to arrive at the marina shortly after the family was scheduled to board. I packed carefully, selecting outfits that were both appropriate for the exclusive destinations and subtly elegant. Nothing Victoria could criticize as being teacherly or inappropriate. As the day approached, I experienced moments of doubt. Was I being petty? Would this cause irreparable damage to my marriage? But then I would remember years of subtle humiliations of Michael's repeated failure to stand up for me, of Victoria's smug smile as she announced family only for the trip. No, this wasn't about pettiness. This was about establishing boundaries and demanding the respect I deserved. The morning of the departure, Michael kissed me goodbye with a mixture of guilt and relief on his face. "I'll call you every day," he promised, "and we'll do something special when I get back. Just the two of us." I smiled and wished him a good trip, saying nothing about my plans. 4 hours later, dressed in a crisp white linen dress with subtle gold accessories, I pulled up to the marina in a taxi. Through the large windows of the yacht club, I could see the Hamilton family gathered on the deck of the gleaming vessel, champagne glasses in hand, as they prepared for departure. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and walked confidently toward the gangplank. The yacht was magnificent in the afternoon sun. 120 feet of sleek, polished luxury, with the name Hamilton's Legacy emblazoned in gold on the hull. As I approached, I could see the family gathered on the main deck for the traditional departure toast. Victoria stood at the centre, champagne flute raised as she no doubt delivered her usual speech about family heritage and exclusive opportunities. I was halfway up the gangplank when Victoria spotted me. Her champagne glass froze mid-air and her sentence trailed off into silence. One by one, the other family members turned to see what had captured her attention, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to, in the case of a few of the younger cousins, poorly concealed delight at the impending drama. Michael's face went pale. He took a half step forward, then stopped, clearly torn between his instinct to greet his wife and his fear of his mother's reaction. Victoria recovered quickly, handing her glass to a nearby staff member and moving to the top of the gangplank to block my path. "Gabrielle," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the deck. "What a surprise. Did you come to see us off?" How thoughtful, but we're actually just about to depart. I continued my steady climb until I stood directly in front of her. "I didn't come to see you off, Victoria. I came for the trip." Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "I believe we discussed this. Due to space constraints and the nature of our business meetings, this year's voyage is family only." Before I could respond, the yacht's captain appeared beside Victoria along with the chief steward. Both men had been with the Hamilton family for years, and both had been personally loyal to Harold. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Hamilton?" the captain asked, looking directly at me, not Victoria. Victoria began to answer. "No, Captain Reynolds, I was just explaining to my daughter-in-law that, The captain interrupted her with a polite but firm, "I was addressing the owner, ma'am." A confused murmur ran through the watching family members. Victoria's expression flickered between confusion and outrage. "I beg your pardon." The chief steward stepped forward and gave me a formal bow. "Welcome aboard, owner. Your suite is prepared according to your specifications, and the crew is ready for your inspection at your convenience." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant cry of seagulls. Victoria's face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a dawning realization as she remembered the terms of Harold's will. "You can't be serious." She finally managed her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze steadily. The yacht was left to me by Harold, as you well know. I've never interfered with family traditions or asserted my ownership because I respect what this vessel means to all of you. But if I'm not considered family enough to be included on this trip, then I have no choice but to exercise my rights as the legal owner. I turned to the captain. Is everything ready for departure, Captain Reynolds? Yes, Mrs. Hamilton. We're just awaiting your order. I nodded. Excellent. Then let's proceed. With Victoria still standing frozen in shock, I walked past her onto the main deck. The family parted before me, some avoiding my eyes, others watching with undisguised interest. Michael hurried to my side, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and awe. You knew about this all along, he whispered as he took my arm. You never asked, I replied simply, and your mother never wanted to acknowledge it. As the crew began preparation for departure, Victoria remained at the railing, her knuckles white where she gripped the polished wood. The power dynamic she had carefully maintained for years had been upended in a matter of moments, and she clearly had no script for how to proceed. I approached her conscious of the watching family, but keeping my voice low enough for privacy. I would have been happy to continue our arrangement from last year, treating the yacht as a family resource that happens to be in my name. All you had to do was include me as family, but you made your choice, Victoria. Now we'll do things my way. With that, I turned to join the captain on the bridge, leaving Victoria to process the new reality she had inadvertently created through her own exclusionary tactics. The first few hours of the voyage were tense to say the least. Victoria retreated to her cabin, or rather what had been her cabin in previous years. I discovered later that she had automatically taken the owner's master suite, and the staff had been too intimidated to correct her until I arrived. When this was brought to my attention by the uncomfortable chief steward, I simply smiled and said, Please prepare the blue suite for Mrs. Victoria Hamilton. She may keep her belongings in the master until it's convenient to move them. I had no intention of forcing an immediate, humiliating relocation. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about establishing boundaries and respect. As the yacht cut through the Mediterranean waters, I made a point of speaking with each crew member, many of whom shared fond memories of Harold, and thanked me for retaining the full staff after his death. It was clear that they had genuine affection for the man who had treated them with respect and generosity. Most of the family kept their distance from me that first day, unsure where their loyalties should lie. Michael hovered awkwardly between his mother's closed door and my presence on deck, bringing me drinks I hadn't asked for and making stilted conversation about the weather. You could have told me, he said, when we finally had a moment alone watching the sunset from the stern deck. Would it have changed anything? I asked. Would you have stood up to your mother if you'd known I owned the yacht? Michael's silence was answer enough. By dinner time, Victoria had emerged from her cabin, her hair and makeup impeccable as always, giving no indication of the afternoon's upheaval. She took her place at the table, not at the head, which would have been the owner's traditional seat, but at the side opposite Michael and me. The meal began in uncomfortable silence, broken only by requests to pass dishes and compliments to the chef. Finally, Michael's cousin Patrick, always the family peacemaker, attempted to lighten the mood with stories from previous yacht excursions. Gradually, the tension began to ease as family members contributed their own memories and jokes. I participated warmly in these conversations, showing that despite Victoria's efforts to exclude me, I was familiar with many of the family traditions and inside jokes from the years I had been permitted to attend. Victoria remained largely silent, watching me with calculated assessment. After dinner, as the family dispersed to various areas of the yacht, Victoria cornered me in the salon. She had waited until Michael was distracted in conversation with his cousins, ensuring we would not be interrupted. You've made your point, she said coldly. Very dramatic, very effective. Harold always did have a flair for the theatrical. I suppose he thought this would be amusing. Harold thought it would be fair, I corrected her. He saw how you treated me, Victoria. He wanted to ensure I would always have a place in this family, even if you tried to push me out. Victoria's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. You manipulated a dying man, turned him against his own family. I did no such thing. I cared for him, listened to him, treated him with dignity during his final months. That's not manipulation, it's basic human decency. You're only after our money, Victoria hissed in. A gold digger with a wholesome facade, perfect for fooling men like my son and my husband. I had anticipated this attack and came prepared. From my evening bag, I withdrew my phone and pulled up a recorded conversation. one of many I had with Harold during his illness, with his explicit permission to record for family memory. "I want you to hear something," I said, pressing play. Harold's weakened voice emerged from the speaker. "Victoria has always been afraid of outsiders. When I brought her home to meet my parents, they were cold to her because she wasn't from our social circle. It hurt her deeply, though she'd never admit it. I think that's why she's so hard on you, Gabrielle. She's protecting herself by rejecting you first." I stopped the recording and met Victoria's stunned gaze. "Harold understood you better than you think. He knew why you behaved the way you did. He hoped you would break the cycle, not perpetuate it." Victoria's composure wavered for just a moment before her expression hardened again. "Playing amateur psychologist won't change anything. This yacht trip is a Hamilton family tradition, and you've turned it into a power play. No, Victoria. You did that when you explicitly excluded me while knowing the yacht was legally mine. All I did was refuse to be erased." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more family members, but the battle lines had been drawn. Over the next 2 days, Victoria escalated her behaviour, accidentally spilling red wine on my white dress during lunch, making cutting remarks about my background when she thought others weren't listening, and attempting to exclude me from excursion planning. Michael witnessed some of these incidents, but continued his pattern of conflict avoidance. "Mom's just upset about the change in arrangements," he would say, or "she'll calm down once she adjusts to the situation." He seemed genuinely incapable of understanding that this was about more than just the yacht. It was about years of systematic exclusion and his failure to address it. Tensions came to a head on the third night during a formal dinner I had arranged at the captain's table. The chef had prepared Harold's favourite meal in his memory, and I had invited everyone to share their fondest recollections of him. It was meant to be a healing moment, a way to acknowledge our shared loss while moving forward. Victoria arrived late, having clearly had several drinks beforehand. As family members shared touching or funny stories about Harold, her expression grew increasingly bitter. When it came to her turn to speak, she looked directly at me. Harold was a brilliant businessman, but a poor judge of character. She said her words slightly slurred. He believed everyone had good intentions. It made him vulnerable to manipulation by people who saw him as a meal ticket. The table fell silent. Michael placed his hand on Victoria's arm. "Mom, that's enough." But Victoria wasn't finished. "I've spent 40 years building this family's reputation, ensuring the Hamilton name means something. I won't stand by and watch an opportunistic outsider dismantle everything we've worked for." She turned to Michael. "It's time to make a choice, Michael. It's her or your family. You can't have both." The ultimatum hung in the air. All eyes turned to Michael, waiting for his response. This was his moment to finally take a stand to defend our marriage against his mother's toxicity. Instead, he looked down at his plate. "Mom, you're upset. This isn't the time or place for this conversation." It wasn't a capitulation, but it wasn't a defense either. Once again, Michael had chosen the path of least resistance, refusing to engage with the fundamental issue. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my plate. "Excuse me," I said quietly, and left the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster. In the privacy of the master suite, I finally allowed my tears to fall. The yacht had changed nothing. Having legal ownership of the vessel didn't address the real problem: my husband's inability to prioritize our marriage over his mother's approval. No amount of property or legal rights could fix what was broken between us. I called my best friend Sarah, who had witnessed the entire arc of my relationship with the Hamiltons. "I don't know if this marriage can be saved," I admitted through my tears. "I love Michael, but I can't spend my life being the only one fighting for us." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But something has to change. I can't continue like this." Little did I know that change was about to arrive in a form none of us could have anticipated. I was awakened shortly after midnight by a violent lurching of the yacht. The vessel pitched sharply to one side, sending items sliding across the floor. Thunder crashed overhead, and rain lashed against the windows with a ferocity that suggested this was no ordinary storm. I grabbed a robe and made my way to the bridge, holding onto railings as the yacht continued to roll with the increasingly large waves. The captain and several crew members were already there, their faces tense, as they monitored equipment and communicated with other vessels in the area. "What's happening?" I asked, bracing myself against a console as another wave hit. "Unexpected storm system, Mrs. Hamilton," Captain Reynolds replied, his eyes not leaving the radar display. "It developed rapidly and changed course. We're adjusting our heading to minimize impact, but it's going to be a rough few hours." As if to emphasize his point, a massive wave struck the port side, causing the yacht to shudder. Alarms began to sound throughout the vessel. "Should we wake the family?" I asked. The captain nodded grimly. "Everyone needs to be in life vests and in the main salon. It's the most stable part of the vessel." I made my way through the yacht, working with crew members to alert all passengers. Most of the family was already awake, emerging from their cabins in various states of dishevelment, expressions ranging from concerned to terrified. Michael found me in the corridor. "Gabrielle, are you okay?" "I'm fine. We need to get everyone to the main salon with life vests," I explained, continuing my methodical check of cabins. We reached Victoria's suite last. Despite repeated knocking, there was no answer. Michael used his key to open the door, revealing Victoria sitting rigid on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the wall as the room pitched around her. "Mom," Michael rushed to her side. "We need to go to the main salon. It's not safe here." Victoria didn't respond. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her hands clutching the bedspread so tightly her knuckles were white. "She's having a panic attack," I realized aloud. Despite everything, I felt a surge of compassion. I knelt in front of her, gently placing my hands on hers. Victoria looked at me, focused on my face. Her eyes, wide with fear, gradually found mine. "We're going to breathe together, okay? In through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 7 out, through your mouth for 8. I demonstrated maintaining eye contact. "Do it with me." Slowly, Victoria began to follow my lead. After several repetitions, her breathing became more regular, though she still trembled violently. "The yacht is well equipped for storms," I told her calmly. "Captain Reynolds is highly experienced. But we need to move to the main salon where it's safer. Can you stand?" Victoria nodded weakly. With Michael's help, we got her to her feet and fitted her with a life vest. The 3 of us made our way carefully to the main salon, where the rest of the family was already gathered. The yacht continued to pitch and roll alarmingly, but the experienced crew moved efficiently to secure loose items and provide reassurance. I noticed several children crying in fear and immediately moved to help. My years of teaching had given me plenty of experience in calming frightened children. I organized an impromptu story circle using animated tales to distract them from the storm raging outside. For the adults, I asked the crew to serve hot tea and arranged for the chef to prepare simple comfort foods that could be eaten easily despite the yacht's motion. I moved among the family groups, checking on everyone's well-being and offering reassurance. My father had been an amateur sailor, and I'd spent many summers on his modest boat learning the basics of navigation and weather patterns. This knowledge, combined with my natural teaching abilities, allowed me to explain what was happening in terms everyone could understand, demystifying the alarming sounds and movements. Throughout the crisis, I remained in constant communication with the captain, relaying information to the family in a calm, confident manner that helped prevent panic from spreading. The storm raged for hours, testing the yacht's engineering and the crew's expertise. By dawn, we had weathered the worst of it, though the seas remained rough. As the first light of day filtered through the windows, I looked around the salon at the exhausted but relieved faces of the Hamilton family. Michael was helping an elderly aunt to a more comfortable chair. Victoria sat quietly in a corner, observing me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When the captain announced that we had successfully navigated through the storm with only minor damage to the yacht, spontaneous applause broke out among the passengers. To my surprise, several family members approached me with genuine gratitude. "You were amazing," Michael's cousin Lisa said, squeezing my hand. "I've never seen anyone so calm in a crisis." "The children would have been hysterical without your stories," another relative added. "Where did you learn to handle emergencies like that?" Even Victoria's brother, who had always been coolly polite at best, nodded respectfully in my direction. "Harold chose well," he said simply. As the day progressed and the sea gradually calmed, the mood on the yacht transformed. The shared experience of facing danger together had created a bond that transcended the previous tensions. Family members who had been avoiding me now sought my company, asking questions about my background and genuinely listening to my answers. Michael watched these interactions with growing awareness, as if seeing me and his family's treatment of me through new eyes. That evening, as we stood alone on the deck, watching the sunset over a now peaceful sea, he took my hands in his. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for last night, but for every time I failed to stand up for you. For every time I chose the easy path instead of the right one." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Watching you last night, how you took charge, how you cared for everyone, even my mother, after all she's done." He shook his head in wonder. "You showed more strength and compassion than anyone I've ever known, and I realized I've been a coward." Michael? No, let me finish. I've been afraid my whole life, afraid of disappointing my mother, afraid of failing to live up to the Hamilton name. But what good is that name if I can't even protect the woman I love? What kind of man does that make me? Tears filled his eyes. I want to be worthy of you, Gabrielle. I want to be the husband you deserve. I'm going to go to therapy work on setting proper boundaries with my mother. No more excuses, no more taking the easy way out. His sincerity was palpable, but I'd heard promises before. Words are easy in the aftermath of a crisis, I said gently. It's the daily choices that reveal who we truly are. You're right, Michael acknowledged, which is why I'm going to start right now. He took a deep breath. I'm going to talk to my mother, really talk to her. And I'm going to make it clear that if she can't respect you, if she can't treat you as a full and equal member of this family, then we will limit our contact with her. I searched his face looking for signs of the hesitation or conflict I'd seen so many times before. Instead, I found determination and clarity. I love you, Gabrielle, he said simply, and I choose you. I should have made that clear from the beginning. As he walked away to find Victoria, I felt a cautious hope blossoming. The storm had shaken more than just the yacht. It had disrupted patterns and perspectives that had seemed immovable just days before. The remainder of the yacht trip unfolded with a new dynamic that none of us could have predicted. Victoria, true to form, initially resisted the changes Michael was attempting to establish. She became defensive when he confronted her about her treatment of me, falling back on claims of family tradition, and suggesting I had turned her son against her. But Michael stood firm, calmly but firmly, explaining that his marriage was his priority, and that Victoria's behaviour toward me was damaging their relationship as well. He made it clear that this wasn't an ultimatum, but a boundary. She could choose to respect it or not, but her choice would determine the nature of our future interactions. Victoria retreated into icy silence for a day, avoiding both Michael and me. The rest of the family, however, continued their warming trend toward me, especially after witnessing Michael's stand. I was included in card games, invited to join shore excursions, and consulted about meal planning, all the small social inclusions that Victoria had previously managed to prevent. On our fourth day after the storm, I was alone on the deck at sunrise when Victoria approached. She looked older, somehow, the perfect facade slightly cracked to reveal the insecure woman beneath. You handled the crisis well, she said after a long silence, her eyes on the horizon rather than on me. Harold would have been proud. Coming from Victoria, this was tantamount to a full apology. I accepted it as such. Thank you. He spoke of you with great love, you know, even at the end. Victoria's composure wavered slightly. Did he? He did. He said you were the most formidable woman he'd ever known, that your strength held the family together through difficult times. A tear slipped down Victoria's cheek, quickly wiped away. We had our share of those. I'm not trying to take your place, Victoria, I said gently. There isn't a competition for who matters most to Michael or to the family. There's room for both of us. Victoria finally looked at me directly. You're nothing like I expected when Michael brought you home. I thought you would try to change him, separate him from his heritage. I fell in love with Michael exactly as he is, including his connection to his family. I never wanted to change that. I just wanted to be part of it. Victoria nodded slowly. I may have misjudged certain things. It wasn't a full admission or apology, but from Victoria Hamilton it was monumental. A small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The weeks following our return home brought concrete changes. Michael began seeing a therapist specializing in family dynamics. He started setting clear boundaries with his mother, no longer automatically acquiescing to her demands or expectations. There were uncomfortable moments and tense conversations, but he remained steady in his commitment to our marriage. Victoria's transformation was more gradual and less complete. She still occasionally made cutting remarks or attempted to exclude me from family decisions. But now when she did, Michael addressed it immediately and directly. And there were moments, brief but meaningful, when she made genuine efforts to include me. A tentative peace developed between us based not on affection but on mutual respect. We would never be close, Victoria and I, but we could coexist as family. For Michael's sake, and eventually for our children's sake, that would be enough. 6 months after the yacht incident, Victoria invited us to dinner at her home. A regular occurrence, but this time with a difference. When we arrived, I noticed the dining room had been rearranged. The family photos on the wall now included our wedding picture and several candid shots of Michael and me from the yacht trip. On the sidebar stood a silver frame I recognized, a matching pair to the one Harold had given me, containing a photo of the three of us from happier times. It was a small gesture, but a significant one. Victoria was acknowledging in her own way that I was part of the family narrative now, part of its history and its future. As for the yacht, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I had the vessel officially renamed from Hamilton's Legacy to New Beginnings. The yacht remained available for family use, but with one important change. All decisions about its use would be made collectively, with every family member having an equal voice. 1 year after the infamous trip, we gathered again for the annual family voyage. Victoria took her place at the dinner table, not at the head, but not excluded either. Just another member of a family that had expanded and evolved to include new perspectives and traditions. As I looked around at the faces of the Hamiltons, some related by blood, others by marriage, all connected by shared experiences and a commitment to moving forward together, I realized that true strength isn't found in ownership or control. It's found in standing up for yourself while remaining open to reconciliation. It's found in setting boundaries without building walls. And sometimes it's found in the courage to say simply and clearly, I belong here too. Have you ever had to stand up to a difficult in-law or family member? How did you handle it, and did it change your family dynamics? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family challenges. Remember that establishing healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine relationships to flourish. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to claim your rightful place at any table where you belong.